All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I've been going over the PowerPoint slides for Murox ASP.NET 4.6 Web Programming with C# 2015 6th edition. We are in the middle of Chapter 2, and we're going to build the future value program, but first let's talk about what the author mentions here. And that is, excuse me, we've already looked at split view, so the next thing is on how to add a table to a form. So let's go and bring up Visual Studio, and we'll bring up the example we've been working on, which is future value 02. Here it is. Right now there's not much to it, so if we do run this, you're going to see the image, and then below it are 401 calculator H1 tag. That's all we have so far. All right, it's quite a ways away from where we want to be. But the next thing that we're supposed to do is to come in here, and in our div, we want to create a table. Now we could just manually, manually put in table tags and add TR tags, etc. We can do that. That's not a problem at all. All right. or what we can do, and to do what I'm about to show you, all right, if we look right here, if I go over to design mode, you'll notice that I've got a thing here that says table. But if I go over to source mode, it's gone. So I have to be in design mode. I want to get where I want the table to go, which is right there. Then go over to design mode, and then say table, insert table. Now this is very similar to the slide that you see, or the picture you see in your book on figure 2.8 that's on page 47. So what we're asked in here is how many rows do we want on the table and how many columns? And they say we want 6, so again, we could always use our spinner here. You get 2 and 2 by default, so I can spin up to 6. If I want to, I can put a bunch of CSS in here right now. In other words, I can add alignment, I can add cell spacing and padding, I can add borders, I can add a color, etc. I can do all that stuff, okay? But that's not really my goal right here. So if I come in here and I just click OK right now, you can see that it's put in this table, all right? And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows and 1, 2 columns. Don't worry about the height and width right now. We can always change that either manually or we can change it as we start putting stuff into it. But you saw I went into design mode and I used the table insert command, which displayed the insert table dialog box. I then went in and set the number of rows and columns and just clicked OK. If we want to resize this, I can come over here and I can drag this down. There's all sorts of things that I can do. If it's too wide, I can narrow it, etc. So you can see all that stuff. All right. If I want to literally add raw text, I can just start typing if I want to do that. Okay. I don't care about all that stuff right now. What I do care about and what I want to start doing is I want to start creating things in my table. In other words, I don't know why I open up Word, but what I want to do is I want the table to start looking like this. All right, so that's what we're going to do right now. So just went through that, just went through this. So to add text to the table, now I've got my choice here, okay? And just so you know, I can either, what I want to do is in these first 4 parts of the table, the first 4 rows in the column 0, in rows 0, 1, 2, and 3, I want to put text, monthly investment, annual interest rate, number of years, and future value. I can just start typing in text. It's not a problem. Just start typing in raw text. Or what I like to do is come in here and start dragging in labels. So label, 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 and label. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lasso all of those. And with all those labels chosen, I guess it's not letting me do it like that. That's fine. But with that label chosen, how's that? I'm going to come up and I'm going to find the well, I'll just start typing. How's that? Let's give it a name. So this first label is going to be monthly investment. So I'll call it label monthly investment. All right. So I will put that in for the text. Put a space in there. And they don't show a colon at the end, so that's fine. So you can see what that looks like now. All right, I can do the same thing for the second one. And label 2 will hold annual interest rate. So I've got that. Label 3, I will rename as label number of years and change the text accordingly. Now mine's not going to look exactly like it does in the book. Maybe mine will look better, maybe it'll look worse. It really and truly doesn't matter. This is done more to get you up to speed with what we're doing here. And the last one, the label will be future value. And the name will be changed to label future value. All right. As long as I'm building all this stuff, I might as well put in the other things. There's going to be nothing in this row. So this is row 0, 1, 2, 3, nothing in row 4. In row 5, I'm going to have a couple buttons. So I'll have a button here. So I'll just put in a button. And we will change the ID to button calculate. And the text to calculate. And then we will put in our other button right here. Okay, and it'll be, see, you can see how it's already moving over. So, and that one will say clear, and its name will be button clear. All right. Okay, and then finally, let's make this a little bit more narrow so these two are a little closer to one another. Good. So this will be a drop-down list. All right, so let's change its name to drop-down list monthly investment. Now I'm not going to put values in there. I could automatically go in here, click edit items and start adding my values. I don't want to do it that way though. We'll talk about why in just a couple minutes. All right. And I think we want the enable postback set, but we'll check that in a bit. And this will be here. This will be a text box. So this will be text box annual interest rate, and with nothing in it. Then we'll have another text box, and this one will be text box number of years, again with nothing in it. And we've got our choice here. What the author shows here is a label for future value, which is fine. Or we could put in a text box and make the text box read only. But let's just follow what the author has done here. Now I've already got a label here that's called label future value. Okay, so let's just change this. We won't want any text there whatsoever. All right, and we'll change this name to label the future value. Kind of silly, but you get the idea. Okay, so we've got all that. So let's double check. Label monthly investment, drop down list monthly investment. Label annual interest rate, text box annual interest rate. Label number of years, text box number of years. Label future value, label the future value, button calculate, and button clear. So right now, at least it appears as though I've got everything the way that I need it to be set up. I can drag this over some more, make this look, less too. So there, it's looking now more like it does in the book on page 49. It still is far, far from perfect. Okay. That looks a little nicer. Okay. Aesthetically, it's pleasing enough. All right. So this is what they show on page 48 as far as how to add the web server controls for the form. Okay, so I showed that to you. I've shown you a little bit how to set properties. We've seen this back in the C# class, and you see it here also. All right, no biggies right there. But what I do want to show you is when I've been doing this, and if I go back to source code mode, I've been writing code. All right, I've been putting code into my ASPX file. Now I'm going to show you something, and by no means do you have to do what I'm about to show you. All right, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to put a bunch of white space in here, just so I can see, kind of show you whoops. So I can kind of show you here what's going on. All right. Again, what I'm doing right now by no means is this mandatory. All right. But I think at least by taking a look at what I've done right here, you can have a much better idea of how this thing is laid out. Again, if you don't agree, then just don't do it. You'll notice that for the drop-down list, I changed the height manually. Boy, oh boy. And I changed the width, both of them, manually. All right, and you can see how this is really coming together now. Hopefully you can see that. But there's a reason, as always, there's a method for my madness. There's a reason that I'm taking the time to do this. Didn't realize there was that much to do, but whatever. Now I've got the font kind of big, but even with it being big, you can see how everything is laid out by the way that I've done it. This does not make the program run any faster, and regardless of what a book might say, it also doesn't make it run any slower. I'm doing this purely for aesthetic reasons, because I think it makes much more sense for you to be able to see exactly how this is laid out. Now, I don't know what happened there. It should say label. All right, why it didn't or doesn't, I have absolutely no idea. Oh, it somehow got moved over there, okay. All right. So again, I'm prettying, tidying it up, whatever you want to call it. But it's going to allow me to show you something, ideally at least, in just a minute. As far as how this indeed is laid out, you can see I got about 4 or 5 more to go here. Hopefully, one thing that you notice as I'm doing this, regardless of whether this is a text box or a drop-down list or a label, every single control that I put in here from our toolbox, from the standard toolbox, must have a unique ID, and it must have the words run at equal server. If I leave off the run at equal server and I change that to just label, then it becomes an HTML control. All right, it is no longer a server-side control. It goes back to being a client-side control. That's not what we want right here. Just about finished. So there's going to be a few things here that I'm going to be able to show you. Until you start working with this stuff, it's probably not going to make a boatload of sense. But regardless, that's fine. But I want to run through it because there's a lot of good stuff in here. Such as, well, you notice when I start setting this up, the system automatically started to create some CSS for me, a width and a height. And I believe, I could be wrong here, but this is probably the width of the table. So literally when I started to create this, the system itself started to write some CSS for me. And it automatically applied the Auto Style 1 or the Auto Style 2. They're both classes, as you can see. So the Auto Style 1, I'm not even sure if we'll see it, but the Auto Style 2, nope, the Auto Style 1 is for the table, and the Auto Style 2 is for things in the table. All right, so that's the first thing. Second, as I already mentioned, each and every server-side control, so anything that you create here under standard, must have a unique ID, and it must have the words run at equals server. If you don't put those in, then instead of being a standard control, it becomes an HTML control. Quite often they'll look almost identical, but an HTML control is rendered solely at the browser side, whereas a server control is rendered at the client side. I'm sorry, at the server. Let's try it again. An HTML control is rendered solely at the client. And a standard control is rendered at the server and then typically sent to the client. And the last thing I want to say is you may have noticed with the buttons here, the author showed, or maybe it just got automatically set up like that. We've got ASP button. Notice we've got that. If we didn't want to put that in, I could have just put in this. See how it automatically put that in? I think. I was wondering if it'll let me put in this. I guess it doesn't like that. It says the button is missing its closing tag. Maybe it should have a slash there. Okay, so I can do it either way. I can do it like this, which was got a self-enclosed tag, or I can do it like this. All right, since the system wrote it for us, and it wrote it like this, we'll just keep it like that. All right, so now our table is set up. So I'm going to save, because it's probably a good time to save, and I'm going to go back into design mode. So you can see it's starting to come together a little bit, and if I do run this, it's not going to look great, but you can see that, again, stuff is starting to line up. Sooner or later, there'll be something there. Right now, there's nothing in here. I can type in stuff here or here. I can click the button here or the button here. Nothing magical happens when I do that. All right? So as mentioned, I'm going to bop back and forth between here and the actual code itself. So I showed you how to drag or add a web control, server control to a form. There's other ways of doing it also. I started showing you how to set properties. Some of the common control properties are shown on the chart that's on page 51 in the book. That auto postback is important. As it says, it determines whether a page is posted back to the server when the value of the control changes. In fact, I want to come back here and do two things. First of all, I want to come back here. This isn't quite wide enough. Come on. That's a little better. I want it to more line up with the ones that we've got here. So let's stop the run. Let's look at the width of this. The width and the height. So these all look pretty much the same size. So it's got, I guess it's not showing it to us because it's inside of a table. But what we should be able to do, let's see. Go into our source. All right, there's our text box. I wonder if we put class equal auto style 2 here. And if we put that on the drop-down list, okay, then we shouldn't need to manually add our own height and width. So let's see if indeed I made it better or worse. Well, now it's a lot bigger, but that's okay. All right. And I do want to come in here and manually click on that smart tag and enable postback. We'll get into that, but not right at this moment. Some of the common properties for drop-down list and list box controls are also shown here. These are all things we've covered in the C# part of the class. All right. We want to add a couple validation controls here to our form. All right. Now there's going to be a whole chapter on this later. So please, if this doesn't make a lot of sense to you, don't let it bother you for right now. All right. So what they want us to do is right underneath our table. So right down here, we're going to come in and instead of choosing standard here, we're going to go down to validation. We don't need that open either. And we first want to set up a couple of required field. All right, so notice there's a required field validator. There's one. And I'll hit space a couple, about 5 times. And then we'll put in a range validator. All right, we'll hit enter, and we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to put in another required field validator. Hit space about 5 times and put in another range validator. All right. Now, these controls by themselves, for lack of better words, they're dumb controls. All right. In fact, let me hit here. There's a lot of space there now. So the first thing we should do is always rename these. Okay, because by default, they're just called required field validator 1, required field validator 2, range validator 1, and range validator 2. Well, that's not very good. So the first one, the required field validator are going to be here and here. All right, this one's going to automatically be filled in for us anyway. Well, we can change it, but these are the two we care about. So it's annual interest rate and its number of years. So let's change the ID here for the first one to required field validator annual interest rate. All right, we'll change this one to required field validator number of years. We'll change this one to range validator annual interest rate. And we'll change this one to range value number of years. Again, I think it's chapter, 7 or something like that? Let's see. It's all on validation controls, chapter 7. So this is just to give us a whiff of this so we can get started. So the first thing we want to do is the required field. We've now changed our name, which is good. That's the first thing we want to do. But we have to choose the control to validate. The control we want to validate here is the text box annual interest rate. The control to validate right here is the text box number of years. The control to validate here is, again, the annual interest rate. And the control to validate right here is, again, the number of years. So now we've associated controls with them. All right? But we have no messages. Right now, the error message is simply going to be required field validator, which is dumb. So I'm going to change this to interest rate is required. All right, and I'll change this one to number of years is required. right, and I'm going to run this again. Now notice error in, oh, okay, I'm going to have to talk to you about unobtrusive validation. That's fine. Let's go in and fix the rest of this stuff in here first. Okay? So we've got this range validator right here. Let's stop the run. For the range validator, let's change that error message. And according to what is in the book, it's interest rate must range from 1 to 20. Well, in order to do that, that's fine, but I have to put a minimum and a maximum value. So the maximum value will be 20, the minimum value will be 1. And I've got fro instead of from here. All right. Okay, so that was that one. And in here, I've got to change the error message to number of years must range from 1 to 45. These are just arbitrary values that the author picked out. And that's fine. So again, the maximum value will be 45. The minimum value will be 1. Now, the other thing I should change in here too is the type. So notice right now it's a string. I want to change that to integer. Oops, not to double. To integer here, and also to integer right there. All right. Again, this is by no means perfect. All right, but it sure is getting there. Okay. Now, the problem that we have is the way that we set this up. The way that we set this up is we set this up as a blank product. And all we had was the web.config file. Then we added our default.aspx file, which is what we're working in here. We haven't even gone to the CS file, the code behind file. We haven't put anything in there yet, but we will. Then we added the images folder. All right? But the point is, when we manually added that stuff in here, we didn't automatically get this unobtrusive validation thing. So we're going to have to talk about that. But before we do, let's go back in our book here and let's talk about what the author mentions. So I showed you how to add the validator to the form. You can do it in design view or source view. You can be right in your code view and you can just drag something in and it'll work. All right. I showed you how to set the properties. Some of the more common validation control properties are shown on page 55. There is one property in here that I did not set that I should at least mention to you. For each one of these, you'll notice, and this is taken right from page 55 in the book, there is a property called display, which determines how an error message is displayed. If you specify static, it allocates space for the error message whether it displays or not. If you set it dynamic, then it only displays it when it needs it. Typically, dynamic looks nicer, at least I think it does. So I'm going to change all of these to dynamic. Again, this may not look exactly like it does in the book. Please play around with this, because the way that you learn how to play with this stuff and what it looks like, how it's different, etc., is to literally just play around with it. That's the only way to learn. All right? I showed you how to set the maximum value. I showed you how to set the minimum value. And we set the type on this one. The type was reset to integer, if you remember. And on this one, it was also set to integer. Notice other types are string, double, date, and currency. We'll hit on some of those in later classes. When we wrote all this stuff, if I go back into my source, you'll notice what was written for us. You can see all my nicely set up stuff here and how pretty it all looks. And then we get down to here and it's ugly again. So you can see, again, by me spacing it out as I have, exactly how this thing is laid out. See that? All right, here were some blank spaces. We didn't have to put those in. All right, looked a little nicer, I think, putting them in, but you may or may not agree with that. Good enough. Again, then here's our range validator. As I mentioned, this is not at all beautiful the way that it's laid out. You don't have to do what I'm showing you right now. I like to do it because, to me, it's very, and the other thing I like to do, and this may sound real simplistic to you, maybe it is what I like to do is when I set these different types of control values like this, is what I like to do is try to set them up in the same order. All right? So I do my, maximum, minimum, etc. I set all that stuff up in the same order. That way when I look at this one and I look at this one, I can really tell, or for example, the range validator here and the next range validator, which we'll see in a minute, if I missed anything. All right? So what I'm showing you or sharing with you right now, for lack of better words, is kind of my own little protocol for doing this. And again, as I already mentioned to you, my program runs no better, none, for me doing it this way. I'd also argue that, again, it runs no worse for me doing it this way. Okay? I just like to do it the way that I'm showing it to you, and put a lot of white space in here and lay it out the way that I'm showing you that I'm laying it out, because to me, it makes more sense to do it this way. But as I already mentioned to you, if it does not to you, lay it out whatever way you want, or don't lay it out. It really and truly does not matter that much, but you should come up with some kind of protocol, some kind of way of laying this stuff out that makes sense to you. So now I believe, finally, it's all laid out. Okay, everything looks nice. So the required field validator that we put in, usually it's used with text box controls, but you can use it with other kinds of controls. Also, it literally means just that the field is required. The range validator tests to see whether or not the control falls within a certain range. All right? So, two more things that we have to do here. The first thing is we have to worry about this unobtrusive validation. All right, and then the next thing is we have to write our C# code. Okay, so before we do that, let's do a save all right there. That's a good start. Let's go back to our PowerPoints. There was the code for our required field validator. Notice they've also set the foreground color to red. A good idea. So what that's going to do is that's going to mean that as we do this, any of these validators that appear will be in red. So let's come down to the bottom. We'll say for color equal red. All right, so I'm going to copy this. Save again. Let's go back into our source mode, design mode, and you'll notice that they're now red in color. All right. We could have set that in CSS also. Okay. In fact, if we want to, and we're going to see this later, but just to show this to you, I'm going to come in here, and there's a field called CSS class. I'm going to type in the word error right there. And don't worry, right now it doesn't exist, but we're going to make it right now. I'm going to put all of them in as error. Now I'm going to go back here into my source mode and where I just put all that stuff in. Notice how it added the CSS class. I'm going to remove that for color equal red. So I'm going to change all of these. Okay. Just about finished. All right, so all that's done. All right, now what I want to do is I want to come up here, and if I want to, I could come in and add my CSS right there. Okay, not a problem. Or if I want to, I can right mouse click on here, choose add. Let's put a new folder in here, and let's call this CSS. All right, and inside of here, I will right mouse click, add new item, and one of the ones that's in here someplace should be a CSS file. HTML style sheet, there we go. And it's called stylesheet.css, which I don't really like. So I'm going to just call it styles, as we've done before in other classes. So I'm going to add that. And there it is. I don't need a body. What I want is a dot error in here. That's going to be my error class. And I want to say color, red, font weight, bold. All right. Now, there's good news and bad news. The good news is that's done. The bad news is this does not know about it at all. So what I'm going to do is, right after my title, before this inline CSS here, is I'm going to drag that style sheet and just drop it in here. And you notice, boom, there it is. Now, if I save and I go back into design mode, notice it's red again and it's now bolded. So I've just shown you how you can apply an external CSS file to what you're working on. And again, this was not meant to be, oh my gosh, we did that, was that cool or what? No, I just want to show you what's going on here. All right? So that gets us to page 56 in the book, starting to talk about this unobtrusive validation. There's a bunch of different ways that you can set up unobtrusive validation. I can go into my load event. So I can go in for, I can go into my code. If I right mouse click, I can, right mouse click. Oh, it's doing that. And I can go to view code, so I can do it there. I can put in my page load event, unobtrusive validation mode equals unobtrusive validation mode dot none. And that's not a problem. I can type that in. All right. If I do put that in though, then if I decide I'm going to have more pages on this particular or in this particular project, and some more of them have forms, then I've got to do that for every form. So I don't like doing it that way, but I can. I can go into the web.config file right here. And I can go and there's a setting I can put in here. Okay, and this is shown, it's in the app settings. So I can go and add the lines of code that are shown. So this was the code we could put in the load event. And I can go in and type in this into my web.config file. But I'm going to do it the other way that the author talks about. And that is installing the NuGet package for jQuery validation. All right, so I'm just following the steps the author has put in here on page 57 in your book. Okay, I don't really need this web.config open, and I really don't even need my styles file open anymore because that's all I'm putting in it. I can reopen it again at any time if I wish to. All right, so I'm going back to here. And now, again, I'm following the steps as laid out on the middle of page 57. Right-click on the project in the Solution Explorer. So right mouse click on the project. All right, and choose Manage NuGet Packages. In the box that appears, we want to click Browse, and we want to type in what to search for right here. Again, this is taken right from page 57 in your book. We want to type in here ASP.NET.ScriptManager.jQuery. And you can see there it is. Select the package here, click the install button. Now, it's saying I'm about to make these changes. Watch what happens over here in our Solution Explorer when I click OK. It added a scripts folder and a bunch of stuff in for jQuery. All right, I can now close this NuGet manager here. Now I'm going to save my program again. Now notice, if I run this, I should get this, there's no error message. And notice if I click calculate, interest rate is required, number of years is required. And if I come in here for the interest rate and I put in something that's out of range, so let's put in 222 and 222. And you notice now I get my interest rate must range from 1 to 20. My number of years must range from 1 to 45. I get rid of that, then that error goes away and the other error comes back. Okay, so you can see what's going on here. So ASP.NET provides a feature that's called unobtrusive validation. If you enable it, the jQuery library is going to be used to do validation that's specified. By default, unobtrusive validation is left on when you start a new web applications form from an empty template. So if you're using the validation controls like we just did, we need to turn it off, which is one thing we could have done, and I showed you two ways of turning it off. One in the load event, all right, and one in the web.config, or we could do what we did, which was to install the NuGet package for jQuery validation. All right. So if we jump back in, I don't need this run anymore, so I can stop my run. And I'm going to jump back into source view. And you see that it's still set up nice. Everything is pretty good. So what they show you in the book on page 59 and 61 is the code, the ASP.NET code. I've already gone over this with you, so I'm not going to again. All right. Instead, I'm going to jump up to page 62, and pages 62 through 67, 62 through 67, have you put in the C# code. And that's right here. So if I want to go and add code for this button and this button, all right, I can come in here. I could right mouse click and choose View Code, and notice it opens it up, but it's not for this event yet because it's not smart enough to do that. But if I double click on this, now it opens up the window for my calculate control here. And if I do it again, now it opens up the window here for my clear button. So I've got my calculate, my clear button, and my page load. All right. So I just showed you how to start an event handler by double clicking the control when I'm in design view. That's the easiest way to do it. Okay? So what we want to do is we want to start putting the code in here. Well, the first thing we want to do is let's think about it. When we click the clear button, what do we want to have happen? All right, when we click this clear button, what do we want to have happen? Well, we want this to be set back to any default value it might have. We want this to be empty. We want this to be empty. We want this to be empty. So let's put in the code to do that. This code is shown in your book. Come on. It's shown in your book on the bottom of page 65. So my drop-down list, monthly investment, and I don't have the same names the author has, dot selected index equals 0, and we're still going to fill out those values. Don't worry about it. The text box interest rate, that's annual interest rate, dot text is going to be set equal to double quote, so the empty string. The text box number of years dot text is going to be set equal to double quote. The label for my annual interest rate, which is future value, label the future value dot text is going to be equal to this. Okay? So what did I do? Well, let's run it, because that's always the best way to see what you've done. Now, I'm going to get messages here. Don't worry about it. Okay? But now notice when I click clear. Wow, that's interesting. I would have thought that would have cleared and that would have cleared. Let's see if I did something wrong. Maybe I didn't save, but I thought I did. Text box for number of years and text box for annual interest rate should be cleared out. Let's put in valid numbers here. All right, clear, and you can see they're clearing. Okay. Remember that all of the event handlers for an ASP.NET web page and its associated server controls, they're executed on the server. So the page must be posted back to the server before the events can be handled. When you post the page back to the server, the init and load events are always raised. So we can put code in there if we want to / need to do so. All right, so let's go back and let's add the rest of our code. And this is the code that's on page 67 in your book. And I need to put in the code here for the calculate button, and I'm going to put in some code for page load. In page load, this is where we're going to fill up this drop-down list box. Now think about it. The only time we really have to fill it up, and it's going to have 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, 200, 350, 300, 350, 400, 450, 500. It's going to have all those values. That's the first thing to realize. Okay? But we want to fill them up ourselves. And the way that we're going to do that is in our page load event, we're going to come in here and we're going to put in this. If not is post back. We're going to go over what all this means in just a moment. For int I equal 50, I less than or equal to 500, I plus equal 50. Again, if this doesn't make sense, we're going to go over it momentarily. Drop-down list for a monthly investment, dot items, dot add, I dot to string. And again, the best way to explain to you what this does is to literally run the program again. And notice now when we run it, it now has the values. 50 through 500 are now in there. That's what we did. In English, what we told the system was, if this is not a postback, which should mean just the first time you call this, fill up that drop-down list for us. Other than that, don't keep filling it up again. We could remove it and refill it, remove it and refill it. That's a waste of our time, and it's a waste of the effort on the server's part. So this code in here, fill up the drop-down list with the values from 50 through 500. In other words, increment by 50 each time. All right? Now we want to put in our calculate code. So we're going to end up writing another function underneath this. So why don't I just write that right now? So I'm going to write in here protected decimal calculate future value. And we'll have passed in here, don't worry, that error will go away in a minute, an integer, which will be the monthly investment. We will have a decimal, which will be the yearly interest rate. And we will have another int, which will be our number of years. All right, and watch how as soon as I put in the curly braces, the error's all going to go away. All right, except that one. Oh, it doesn't return anything yet, and that's why we're getting the error. We'll fix it in just a moment. All right. So what we want to say here is if is valid. What that means is if all of our tests, all of our validation tests passed, then we want to do this. So int monthly, int monthly investment is equal to convert.toInt32, the drop-down list, monthly investment dot selected value. In English, what we're saying is our monthly investment, this right here, our monthly investment right there, that value is going to be equal to whatever we put in here. Then we're going to do a number of years, which is going to be put into there. So that's the first one. Then we've got a decimal, and that'll be yearly interest rate, and that's going to be equal to convert.toDecimal, our text box, annual interest rate dot text. All right, little anal here, but. And then we have our int years, and that's going to be equal to another convert dot to int32, and that will be text box number what I did there. That one. Number of years dot text. All right, so I'll put a little comment here that says declare and initialize local variables. Okay. Decimal future value, and that's going to be equal to the function call that we're about to make. This dot calculate future value. All right, and in order to do that, we need to pass in the monthly investment, the year monthly interest rate and the years. All right. Should have been yearly. Yeah, that's right. All right, so that's all clean and correct now. So this will say call calculate future value function with provided parameters to actually calculate the future value. All right, so all that's done. And then finally, fill in the future value result label. And not only are we going to do that, we're going to do a toString on it, but we're going to say C here to make it in currency format. Okay? So the only thing that's left now is to write this routine. Okay, we have to work with months, and what is months? Months is years that we passed in times 12. 12 months in a year, that makes sense. So again, we're going to come in here, and I'll grab the same comment I used from the top. Declare and initialize local variables. There we go. So there's our months. If we say that the interest rate, for example, is 5%, that's an annual interest rate. To get the monthly, we've got to divide that 5% by 12. All right, so those are done. This will actually hold the calculated future value. So we'll initialize that at the start to 0.0. I think if I do initialize it, I need a letter M in there, I believe it is. And now it's just going to give me a message saying that I've got this variable that I'm not using. So all that's left now is to do the future value calculation. Do the future value calculation. So we'll put in a for loop here, int I equals 0, I less than months. So we're having our months go from 0 through however many months there are, minus 1 for lack of better words. So if it's 1 year, it'll go from 0 through 11. I plus plus and future value equal future value plus monthly investment. I don't want to put a double quote there. Future value plus monthly investment. So I want that thing inside of parens. And I want to multiply that by 1 plus the monthly interest rate. That's going to do our formula for us. When we get all done, I want to return the future value. All right, so let's see. Well, let's run it. Well, let's save it and run it. And I believe it was in the last chapter. Yes, it was. I'm going all the way back to page 21 for a second. I'm going to run this, and I'm going to say monthly investment of 50, an annual interest rate of 3, a number of years at 10, calculate, and it says, well, that sure isn't right. It would be nice. How about this? Does it clear work? Yes, so all that works. Notice too, if I change this to 300 and I click clear, thought it would change that back, and it did not. So let's put a valid value here and a valid value here. And now let's, whoops, that's okay. Let's run it one more time. Trying to actually prove a point here. Change that to 500, annual interest rate of 2, number of years of 2, calculate, we get a number, fine, clear. See how that changed back to 50. All right, so there is a problem right now with the calculation. Other than that, the program is complete. So somehow I goofed up something on our calculation. So let's double check. Int months equal years times 12. Monthly interest rate equals yearly interest rate divided by 12 divided by 100. There we go. Now let's try it. And try it again, the thing that was on page 21. So leaving that at 50. This will be 3, they use 3.0, 3 or 3.0, there's no difference. This is 10. Now if we did this right, it should be $7,004.54. And it's saying, oh, I think we made that an integer, and I'll have to go back and make that a double. 7,454. Well, that's good. Our clear works. Okay, so there's one last thing that I have to do, and that is I can stop the run. So go back into Visual Studio, stop my run, go back into design mode, and this annual interest rate, this should not be an integer as I set it up. And it's in here for anything for the interest rate. All right, that value, that should not be set there to type integer. It should be set to type double. Now if I run this again, save and run, and I change, I'm going to leave that at 50, and that was 3.0, and that was 10. Now it doesn't break, and I get the correct answer. All right, my clear works, you see that. If I come in here and make it 250, and I make an interest rate of 5 and a number of years of 20, I'll get a different number. That works. All right, the clear works. If I calculate, I get my 2 error messages, which are my required fields. If I put in this and I put in this, I get my other error messages. So as far as I can tell right now, everything works, which pops us out to the end of the chapter. And I want to go over this. So this is the stuff that is all the way up. Let's jump up to page 64 and 65. Let me stop my run here. I'm going to do another file, save all, because I just think it's a good idea. I'm going to jump back into the PowerPoint slides. All right, so we did the NuGet thing. I showed you the other ways of doing it. I put in the design mode, I put in the validation controls. We looked closely, or pretty closely, at the associated ASPX code. It's explained in more depth and breadth of coverage in your book. All right, we inserted some code. I showed you comments. In your book, the init, the load, and the pre-render are shown on page 65. The init is fired when a page is requested from the server. The load is fired when a page is requested from the server after all controls have been initialized and the view state has been restored. The pre-renderer, all the control events for the page have been processed, but before the HTML is sent back. So any or all of these, or none of these, can have code associated with them. Some of the common ASP.NET control events: click typically for a button, text change for the value in a text box, check changed for a radio button or a checkbox, and selected index changed for a drop-down list. That was the code we put in for the buttons clear event. This was the code that we put in for the, on 67 rather, this is the code we put in for our C# code that we put in. There's a big explanation of the code on page 66, but I already went over it with you. I talked about the is valid. All right, so we went over all this. I showed you how to run the application, how to stop the application, so you've seen all of these. All right. If we do put in an error, I've shown you errors before and where the errors come through. Now, 2 ways to view the page from within a browser. Let's run this one more time. All right, we'll put in the values that now are familiar to us: 50, 3.0, and 10. And we click calculate. Now if I right mouse click and choose view source, this is what I want to show you right here. All right, there's all of our source, but the key thing I want to show you, and hopefully you can read this, let me drag this up, is this line right here. It's got the view state. What the view state is, for lack of better words, when an HTML page is requested from the browser, ASP.NET, which is a server-side code, generates the HTML and returns it to the browser. The view state data is stored in this hidden field. It's encoded so you can't read it. And what I'm showing you here is similar, although the values are probably not identical, to what's shown in the book here, and in particular right there with a view state. See, they've got WCKB or WGJB or whatever. And mine are different numbers. If you want more on that, you can read page 70 in the text. Okay? This build a quote application, that's what they have you do yourself at the end of the chapter. So what we've done is we've pretty much completed now Chapter 2. We did it in 2 parts. All right? Next, we will go on into Chapter 3. And when we go on into Chapter 3, let me do one more file. Save all. And then let's do a file, close solution. Do I want to stop? Oh yeah, you should always stop debugging first. So file, save all. And then do a file, and we'll do close solution. All right, I'm going to do 2 things very quickly, and then I'm going to put this chapter to rest. First is, the next chapter we're going to go over is Chapter 3. So I'm going to bring that one up. And it's how to use HTML5, CSS3, and Bootstrap. Again, that will be 2 or 3 different lectures. And the other thing I want to do is I want to grab where I've been creating this. Where's that folder? Our ASP.NET folder now has future value 1 and future value 2 in it. In the next chapter, we're going to keep working with this one, but I'm going to do a copy and a paste, and I don't want this to be called that. Now, what I just did will work just fine. I've now got future value 03, but notice all of my internal files will still, as I go through here and look at them, anything that's named with the old name is still going to be called future value 02, which is just fine. So I'm going to pick it up in just a couple minutes on page 77.